Hello and welcome back to the Straight Line Path podcast. I'm joined here with my co-host Peter. Now, this was an excellent episode with Kingsley Aikins. Kingsley Aikins is the CEO of the Networking Institute as well as the Diaspora Institute. He's a TEDx speaker and has a long and fruitful career spanning over 6 countries.
Kingsley was great today. We broke down everything networking, from building genuine connections, why everyone has a personal brand and why they need to improve it, and also how you can just generally improve your networking skills in this digital age. We really hope you enjoy this one.
Kingsley, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So you're the CEO of the Networking Institute. We hear the word networking quite a bit. It's almost like a buzzword these days. In your opinion, how would you define what networking actually is?
Yeah, well, look, it is a common word in sort of common parlance these days. I have to say, I think pretty generally it has a pretty lousy image. I think most people, when they think of networking, they think of kind of sleazy, slimy individuals late at night in a bar, flicking out business cards, looking for a job, looking for a sale, So I think the whole concept of networking struggles a little with what people perceive it to be. My definition is it's building long-term hearts and minds, sustainable relationships. But I would go so far as to say, to survive and thrive in the world that we're living in now, you need to build strong and diverse networks. And of course, the challenge is that nobody teaches this kind of stuff. Schools and colleges don't teach networking, and companies expect you to be good at it, but they don't really spend much time on it either. So I think that's an interesting kind of position we find ourselves in, is trying to inculcate this notion of networking in a benign sense to lots and lots of people.
Yeah, you've mentioned that as well. Like it's super important skill, and you're almost expected to have these skills. Why do you think then it's got that bad name, connected to it? Like you said, the kind of lousy, the late night in the bar. Why do you think it garnered that name?
Well, I'm sure there's people who are like that, and are really do badgering people in bars looking for something, etc. I think there's probably that dimension to it, and I think that slightly sullies sort of the bigger concept. See, I come from a background that there's 2 words which are going to influence your life and your world and your existence and your job and your family and all that kind of stuff. And those 2 words are other people. And when you think about it, you'll never get a job unless other people agree to it. You'll never get, promotion unless other people agree to it. You'll never get married unless other people agree to it. So other people hold the keys to one's success in many ways. And yet we're never really trained very well on, how do we handle other people? So I think when you come at it from that perspective and you realize that, the keys to your success really are in the hands of other people, you got to spend time building relationships, building connections, building that kind of persona, building your own personal brand, if you like, all around this stuff. Because opportunities don't float around on clouds. They're attached to people. So if you're looking for an opportunity, you're really looking for a person.
Yeah. And, when you're doing these masterclasses and you might be mentoring people, how important is awareness of this? Because I don't think a lot of people are aware of that.
I think you're right. I mean, I think it goes back to something I just said at the beginning. Like, schools and colleges don't teach networking. If you think about it, progress at school or college is a function of a grade, a score, a mark, a metric, if you like. It's a number. And it's got nothing to do with the person sitting beside you. And then you get into the real world of work. And everything has got to do with the people around about you. And, it's critically important. And there's a whole series of things that count but can't be counted. So things like resilience, determination, grit, attitude, humor, crack, all of this stuff, we sometimes bundle it as under soft skills. They're actually quite hard, and they're really, really important, but nobody tells you that. So that's a challenge.
Okay, so you are, a student at the moment. You understand how important this networking is. What should you be doing to maybe increase and get better at networking?
Well, I think you have to understand a few basics behind it. Firstly, that networking is not a luxury; it's a necessity. Secondly, that we all have 2 types of networks. We have an organic network, which kind of just happens, and it's a function of your family, often your schooling, your college, your sports, your activities, your church, or whatever, those sorts of things. And in a way, we kind of inherit that network. But as you progress through life, you actually have to develop a second, different type of network. And that's a network that's intentional, that's thoughtful, and that's strategic. And you're not born a networker. This is completely a learned experience. And in fact, what's curious, and people when I do these masterclasses find it hard to accept when I say that, we tend to mix up networking and sociability. In other words, we have this notion that, the best networker is somebody who's incredibly sociable, knows lots and lots of people. But here's what's kind of curious. Introverts can be better at networking than extroverts. And why is that? Because they do it with decency and authenticity and integrity. They ask questions. They listen. They completely understand that they need to spend time on their own as well as spending time with other people. The extrovert kind of wants to wow you, wants to impress you, wants to look over your shoulder, find somebody more interesting to talk to, wants to drop names all the time. And I think, but in any group of people, about a third are introverts, about a third are extroverts, but a third are where I think I possibly fall, which is I'm an ambivert. In other words, I really, really enjoy social activities. I enjoy meeting people. I enjoy meeting new people, but I also need time on my own. I need time to recharge. I think there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. And I think trying to get that balance right is one of the challenges that we have.
Okay, that's very interesting. I suppose it makes sense as well from the introvert perspective, and then again from the extrovert perspective. They're always probably listening and waiting, but more so waiting for their time to talk and to speak instead of actually listening to the other individual. And for introverts and extroverts alike, is there specific tailored advice you would give to them when it comes to networking? And maybe someone who's listening is an extrovert and they're wondering how they can maybe tone down this, oversharing side, and then the introvert, how they can, use their advantages that they already have in networking.
Yeah, I think maybe if you dial back a little bit and I'll talk a little bit of why do I think this stuff's important. I think it's important because, frankly, in life, you can't go it alone. I said opportunities don't float around on clouds, they're attached to people. So if you're looking for an opportunity, you're looking for a person. And there's lots and lots of benefits of being a good and strong networker, and helps you get business and it helps you progress. All that's good stuff. But all the research shows that people who have strong and diverse networks live longer, are stronger mentally and physically, earn more money, and are happier. And I kind of like all of those. But we're living in a world which is extremely diverse. Like, you young fellas here, you're living in a very cosmopolitan society in many ways here in Ireland. When I was growing up, we were kind of all Irish, all from here. Now, about 20% of the workforce weren't even born in Ireland. So there's great diversity, which has made the country, I think, a much more interesting place. But the question is, does your network reflect the diversity of the society you live in, the economy you work in? And for most people, the answer is probably no. And there's a Greek concept called homophily, which is the tendency we all have to hang around with people just like us. We go to school with them, we play sport with them, we go on holidays with them, we marry them, we produce more of them. But that's not what the world out there is. So one of the important things is to look at your network. I use an analogy is look at it as being a bit like an orchestra, and you're the conductor of the orchestra. And orchestras are made up of people with fantastic skills at violins and string instruments and wind instruments and percussion instruments. And when they all come together, like the whole is more than the sum of the parts. And I think if you look at it like that, and you're the orchestra, and you're the conductor of this orchestra, and the orchestra is your network, but you want diversity. If everybody in the orchestra played the same instrument, it'd be pretty gruesome sound. And that's the challenge we all have, is to ensure that we don't just hang around with people who are just like ourselves, because what happens is you develop a kind of an echo chamber. People reinforce each other's ideas, and it's very kind of monocultural form of thinking.
Yeah, that's really interesting as well, is to think of it from that perspective, because you need to get all of the right balance. and all the elements to build that strong network.
Yeah.
An issue I see a lot of the time with networking nowadays is it can feel so transactional, right? You go to these events and it's straight away, you know, what's your LinkedIn? Where do you work? What do you do? What are you studying? And I find off the back of that, sometimes it's really hard to build a genuine connection with individuals. How would you say we should navigate that and actually try and build a strong, deep-rooted network opposed to this transactional base that we see?
I think that most people, when they think of networking, they think of trying to get something for themselves. And we in the networking industry, we kind of come at it from a completely 360 on that one. We think that actually networking is what can you give to other people? How can you put your network at the disposal of other people? How can you help other people? And I think when you take that kind of approach to networking, you try to turn everything on its head. And it's not about me. It's more about, you know, what together we can maybe achieve, or how can I help this other person? And it's this really simple premise. I mean, in life, the more you give to other people, the more comes back to you from the network. Now, as you can see, I've been around a long time and I've worked in a load of different countries, and I've always found that taking that approach to networking completely changed my life and opened up opportunities that I couldn't possibly have imagined. Whereas if I just said, look, I want to be transactional in this one, I can see somebody over there, they've got something I might want, I'll go nail them on this. It actually is a little bit shallow and short sort of thinking.
Okay, that's interesting. And, you know, to be honest, I think I need to maybe apply that a little bit in my own life when I listen to that advice. And actually, for the young individuals listening to this, maybe they're around our age and they mightn't think that they have that much value to offer another individual. Is there any advice you'd give to them when networking with people if they don't have, you know, that kind of value proposition?
Yeah, and you know, it depends what you mean by a value proposition. You don't have to be a rock star or a sports star or an academic star or whatever. I mean, everybody's got themselves to give, just their own personality, their own character, their own interests, their own background. And the clue to being great at networking is actually, I think you touched on a bit earlier, is to be a world-class listener and to ask questions and to be curious and to start sentences that begin with who, what, when, where, why, and how, and finish with a question mark. And we live in a strangely kind of uncurious world where often you can spend long periods of time with people and they never ask you a question. So I'm a huge fan of just seeing listening as a form of activity, listening not just with your ears, but with your eyes. And, you know, a lot of people are what we call narcissistic listeners. So if I say to you, I'm thinking of buying a car, and you say, oh, I bought one last week and the guy wanted 20,000, I got it for 10,000 and it's got a red tires, it's fantastic. You've taken my topic, you've hijacked it and turned it into your topic. People do that all the time. So, you know, if you're to ask me, what's the greatest skill that you need to be a good networker, I'd say is to be a good listener.
And yeah, it really is important, and it starts from that perspective. But looking at it as well, now we move into sort of digital age. I think, you know, since post-COVID, more and more engagement with people are happening online. And we know that, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but more of your actual conversation happens physically than it does just verbally. You know, it's the subtle emotions, the hand gestures. How has that changed networking online? How do you find that conversing with people? How do you still maintain and do the best in the digital space?
Yeah, and I think you're alluding to a guy called Merabian, who has this theory of, you know, communication is, you know, 7% words, 30%, you know, something else. Over 50% is body language. You know, it's not even talking at all. So that's really important. So what was the second bit of your question there? Sorry.
So how do you think that's changing networking now in the digital age?
So, you know, I think we need to have 4 different types of network. We need to have a personal network. And that's, you know, your friends and your family and your buddies and your mates. And that's all great stuff. We've all got that. And that's interesting because they're doing different things in different places. They can introduce you to people doing different things. I think that's great. I think you have to have an operational network. And that means having a cordial and courteous, respectful relationship with the people with whom you work. You don't have to go out drinking with them on a Friday night, but you got to have a good working relationship. So it's important you work on that. You also need to have a strategic network, and they are the people who are going to impact and help you get to where you want to get to in the next 5 to 10 years in your career. But the fourth type of network you need, back to what your question is about, is I think we now need to have an online network, an online identity, an online brand. So there's, I did a gig the other day for LinkedIn in Dublin, and they were telling me there's 1.1 billion people on LinkedIn. I guess you guys are both on it. There's 1.1 billion people on LinkedIn around the world who said to this company, here's all my education details, here's all my qualifications, here's all my interests and hobbies, and here's the people I know, and here's where I went to school. You can have it for free. It's unbelievable. And less than 1% post anything on LinkedIn. So you can see there's an opportunity there to create a bit of an identity. And I think that kind of leads into this whole area of what we call Me Inc. You are a startup. You are a company. You are a CEO, managing director, marketing director, personnel director of a company called Me Inc. And that's the world that we've moved into. The guy called Reid Hoffman, and he founded a company called LinkedIn, I just mentioned. And Reid Hoffman has written a book called The Startup of You. And it's a really good read in that's the approach he takes, is that you've got to invest in yourself. You've got to take responsibility for your own career development. Nobody else is going to care about you. Does your boss care more about himself or more about you? So you got to ask yourself those sorts of questions. And part of it leads on to your own personal brand. I'm always a bit nervous about talking about this topic because I think it kind of makes you sound like a tin of beans when you're talking about but and I do love this definition that I kind of cobbled together from a few different sources, but that a brand is a promise that lives through an experience that creates a memory and leads to loyalty and results, if you're in business, results in sales. But I think that's an interesting sort of mix of things to look at, and the reality is that people pay more money for a brand than they do for a generic product. And we all have a personal brand, whether we like it or not. In fact, not having a personal brand is having a personal brand. So I think that, it's worth thinking about that. And your brand is not what you say it is. It's what other people say about you. It's about your reputation. And your reputation is what somebody says about you when you're not in the room. So now you got to think and make some thoughts and decisions about this. Do you want to create what your personal brand is? Or do you want other people to create what it is? And the reality is that every day you're being judged, whether you like it or not. And we live in a world where you're either Googling or being Googled. That's the kind of world we're in. So you do have to find a way to become known, build your reputation. I always say to be known, not famous. You don't have to become a Kardashian. But at the same time, you got to be known for something. You got to find your niche, and within your niche, what's your little micro niche? Where's your element of excellence that you want to focus on, and that when your name is mentioned in rooms that you're not in, people know who you are and what you're talking about.
Yeah, I honestly think like everything you said there, particularly about Me Inc., the personal brand. I think it's definitely standing true, especially in this day and age and going forward into the future. My question would be for the individuals that, let's say, are invisible, who their personal brand is no personal brand. What kind of advice would you give to them to just get up and running? What core focus areas should they focus on?
Yeah, so and it's easy for me to say this, at my stage and all the rest of it. But I have youngsters, my own youngsters, who are in their 20s, and they're grappling with all this sort of stuff. And I think that they need to have there's some harsh facts of life about life and business. For example, so my parents would have told me when I was your age, I guess, they would have said to me, listen, work hard, keep your head down, and let your good work speak for itself, which is really shitty advice. And why? Why is that? Because work doesn't speak. Other people speak. And if nobody knows the contribution that you're making to the organization, if nobody knows what you're doing, then guess what? It's a competitive world out there. People are going to move right along to the next name on the list. So it's a little harsh, I think, what I'm saying, that people have to actually spend time and effort in this area of thinking about their personality, their character, their values, all of those things. And then, not hiding it all like a light under a bushel, but actually making sure that other people know about it. So they have to find a way to speak up. And I think the sorts of things that can help is having a mentor. I've got a couple of mentors who mentor me, and they're in their 20s. So I have what we call reverse mentors, So I learn from them because I want to know what's going through their heads and the sort of life that they lead. I mean, my kids are that age, they wouldn't do it with me, So I think I'm a lost cause. So I think mentors are important. Having a sponsor is quite an interesting concept within an organization. So a mentor could be anywhere, it could be outside the organization, but a sponsor has to be within the organization. And a mentor talks to you, but a sponsor talks about you. So you need to have people who are willing to speak up about you. And that means they need to know, what have you contributed to the organization? What things have you done that have helped the organization achieve its goals? So things like public speaking become important. I mean, the most successful investor in the world in history ever is Warren Buffett. And he has a master's degree and he's a degree from university. He doesn't have those certificates on the wall of his office in Omaha, Nebraska. He's one certificate. And with the Dale Carnegie course in public speaking, he has on his wall. And he says, if you can be a competent public speaker, it increases your net worth in many ways by 50%. Being able to get up and to speak. So I'm a huge fan of, I have kids who've done debating at school, which I think was really, really helpful. And it is about learning the soft skills. I mean, the hard skills are great and you need them, etc. Hard skills get you on the ladder. Soft skills get you up the ladder. Lots of people have hard skills. Lots of people have those technical skills. And I'm always chipping away at schools and colleges here. And I go into them and they run things for transition year. And I've been into all the universities trying to encourage them to take this seriously. Because the CEOs around town will all say the same thing. The kids coming out of university today are fantastic, deductive, analytical, sharp, well-trained, great, we're so fortunate, but quite weak at soft skills. So they will text, not talk. They won't pick up the phone, right? So that's the world that we're in. So we have to kind of push back against that in things like being able to speak publicly and actually approaching strangers. I mean, I call it stranger danger. There's this concept that, what do we teach? What do our parents teach our little baby kids? Don't talk to strangers, right? Mm. But everybody you know and love in life, outside your mom and pop and your brothers and sisters, was at one stage a stranger. Something happened. You either met them at a party, in a pub, on a flight, or playing football or something, and they became part of your network. So you won't build a network unless you get comfortable talking to strangers. And there's this, the whole notion of homophily, where we only talk to people who are just like us. We have to seek out unlike-minded people. We have to seek out people who are quite different from us. They might look different, sound different, think different, pray differently, So, that's a challenge. And I think, the challenge we have now is that technology and these devices, we just spend our entire, I love them, we all love them. We all spend our entire life on these devices. It's one-to-one communication, it's not one-to-many. My youngsters came home the other day and said, she said, isn't it great news? Young people are drinking much less than ever before. I said, yeah, possibly, but maybe it's not great news, because when you have a drink in your hand, you're talking and communicating and chatting to people and you're being sociable. And, so don't throw it completely out the door. So I think there's lots of those sort of characteristics. I'm also a great fan of a concept, I call it funnels of serendipity, how luck and chance are going to change and influence your life. But they don't happen lying in bed. Luck doesn't happen sitting at your desk. It happens when you're out and about, when you put your talents on display, when you talk to strangers, when you seek out unlike-minded people, when you break your routines, when you do all of these different things, it's very easy to end up living and working in a silo. I sometimes provocatively ask people, when was the last time you did something for the first time? And many people really struggle with that question because they can't think of anything, and so it always opens up an interesting debate and people's bucket lists, etc. Anyway, I'm beginning to rant a bit here.
Yeah, no, that's great advice, and I love that about luck and chance, because one of my favorite quotes of all time, it's the harder I work, the luckier I get.
Yeah.
And the more opportunities you get into, the more things actually come from it. Just to pull you back on the point about the Me Inc. And starting to post, only 1% of people who have LinkedIn post on it. There's a fine line. We talked about it earlier as well, about maybe the extroverts who kind of do everything and it's almost a little bit too much in your face. How would you advise people who are going to start posting and they're starting to build their own personal brand? How do you do it without coming off in that extroverted, in your face way, and actually be genuine?
And I suppose the easy answer is to say, you just think about the way you live your regular life. You're not boasting or shouting or hollering from the hilltops. You have a modulated way of approaching things, but you don't disappear. So I think if you just, we all know the sorts of people who are constantly saying, online, the great things they've done, the photographs of the famous people that they're with, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I think you just have to, like everything, get the balance right. I'm a fan of the notion that, to survive in the world that we're in now, I think you've got to be high tech, and I think you've got to be high touch. And I think we're in a world where we're hurtling down the road to, AI is going to be amazing and wonderful and fantastic and scary. And we're hurtling down that road. I think it's going to impact so many things. Some of them it'll impact very well, but I think things like education, universities, schools, etc. So people can bang off essays on ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever it is. But I think it's getting that balance between high tech and high touch is an interesting thing for our lives, which we didn't really have growing up because there wasn't much tech. It was Remington typewriters is about it. So that's a whole new dynamic. And I think, I think the greatest crisis in the world today, I think, is loneliness. And the Harvard longitudinal study on loneliness, which has been going on for 80 years, and you can go online and read it, it said that loneliness and isolation are as damaging to your health as alcohol, obesity, and drugs. In other words, they're saying, it is such a life-shortening phenomenon, loneliness. And I think there's a whole pandemic of loneliness out there. And bizarrely, technology, which was designed to bring us all together, is actually having exactly the opposite effect. And we're spending time all alone in front of a screen. And I think that that's one of the big crises out there in society is loneliness.
Yeah. And, the fact that you mentioned that, when I look around, when I walk outside, everyone at the bus stop might be looking at their screens. When they're walking down the street, they might have headphones on, for example, but they're not really talking to anyone. And I know from reading some of your material, you talk about getting away from your desk and incorporating, some sort of uncertainty into your routine, where you go somewhere that you usually wouldn't go at a certain time. What advice would you give to, like, an individual who tends to find themselves maybe siloed at their desk or on their phone or wearing headphones? What sort of advice would you give them?
And, I'm not against being on the phone, headphones. I remember looking online at photographs of trains in the US in the 1920s, and everybody's reading a newspaper, right?
Yeah.
And so what's the difference? I mean, not a whole lot of difference, I guess. But I think, half the battle is just being aware. And if you're aware, then you're willing to make efforts to read different things, to pick up magazines and things you wouldn't think about reading. I think books and reading it's a great way of opening your mind and without having to go anywhere or do anything. I think seeking out the unlike-minded people, making an effort, to talk to people who aren't like you, as I said earlier. I think that's very helpful, just being warm and friendly and kind. I remember asking my mother when I was a youngster, what do you think I should be when I grow up? And she said, be kind. And I still remember the advice in a way. Be grateful, for when you see what has been going on in other parts of the world, like Gaza, etc. Aren't we lucky to live in this country? So none of this is rocket science. You guys know all this stuff, but I think the important thing is to implement it. And it's so easy just to say this stuff, but a little bit more difficult to do it. And there's a 10 two-letter words which says, if it is to be, it is up to me. Everybody's got to make a decision on this stuff. And they got to decide, is this important? Now, I'll make my argument is that it's really important. It's important for your personal life. It's important for your professional life. It's important for your career. And in all of that stuff, other people are going to be the key determinants of what happens.
We talked a lot today about what individuals can do, get better at networking, increasing their network. You also mentioned a lot about how universities and schools aren't doing enough, or they're not teaching this stuff. What should they be doing now to help people? We've established this as a really big, important factor, people in your life. What should universities be doing to advocate for this?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of, partly because of my own experience back in university days, of clubs and societies within the universities. I think they have a hugely important role to play. And it could be a debating society, it could be a language society, it could be economics, it could be anything. But just partly to get you off screens, and get you into interacting with people. And as I think I was beginning to say a little while ago, CEOs of companies basically saying, the great talent is coming out of the universities, but they're particularly weak in this area. They're technically really good. So it's this challenge of, hard skills versus soft skills. And there's a sense that soft skills, well, they're a bit soft and squishy and not that important, etc. Whereas I would come out of that, they're really important. And, hard skills, they're actually changing all the time. Technically they're changing all the time. Never heard of ChatGPT a couple of years ago, but suddenly it's dominating our lives. Whereas soft skills, resilience, determination, grit, humor, all those things I mentioned earlier, they don't change. They don't change over the years. The ability to be a good communicator, that doesn't change. The ability to get up and speak doesn't change. The ability, to influence other people, to get people to buy into your ideas. Google did a big survey, if you ever heard of this, called Project Oxygen. And it's online, you can read this. And they did another one then called Project Aristotle. And they wanted to do is to research the top 7 skills that make a manager in Google. And they found that the 7th of the top 7 and last skill was technical ability. Okay. And they found all the other skills were all about leadership. We're all about communication. We're all about working in teams. We're all about showing care and empathy for other people. It was all people sort of circle focused comments, etc. And the technical stuff came right at the bottom. In other words, you can teach people. People can come on board with technical skills, and then they have to learn all this other stuff. I remember hearing the HR head of BP, British Petroleum, being asked, why do they hire classics graduates from Oxford and Cambridge? And he said, because we find classics graduates sell more oil. And I thought that was interesting. In other words, give me somebody with the ability to do Greek and Latin in Oxford or Cambridge, and that's the sort of brain and intellect that we want, and we'll be able to train them to do the other stuff, So I think your question is, what should schools and colleges do? I just love to see schools, and particularly, and I go into transition year and do this a fair bit. I'd love to see schools make this an important part of transition year, these soft skills. I'd certainly like to see universities focusing on this as part of the sort of preparation for people going out into the big bad world after college.
Yeah. That's super interesting. And as well, on top of that, you know, how important these soft skills actually are. Like you mentioned, Project X with Google, and then on when people seek to get promoted, it isn't really the performance, although it does play a part. It is those soft skills, and again with the classic graduates, is there and actually in our chat previously, I mentioned how I always find when I listen to success stories that networking played a core impact on these individual success stories. Is there any story that you've maybe witnessed in your own life or in someone else's life that where meeting one person, let's just say, had an amazing impact on the level of success that they had?
Yeah, I mean, I think a general comment and then a specific answer to your question is that the technical skills you need to get your job in the first instance, critically important as they are, as you progress through your career, become less important because and you can't compete on what everybody has, and relationships become more important. And I'm a fan of a woman called, I'm a fan of a guy who's written a book called The Pie Theory. And the pie theory, he says, is kind of an outrageous theory. He says how well you do your job contributes 10% to your career progress, which sounds ridiculous. You know, when I heard it first, I said, "There's a guy called Harvey Coleman." I said, "That can't be true. Surely, do a super job like that's like 90% of your career progress." He said, "No, it's 10%." And what he said was, he said, doing a super job gets you into the stadium of competition, gets you onto the ladder of aspiration, but doesn't get you up the ladder. He said you get paid on your performance. You get promoted on what other people think of your potential. Now back to those two pesky little words, other people. So that's an outrageous thing, because he said then 30% of your career progress is your image. You know, what do people think of you? What's your reputation? We talked about that a bit earlier. You know, can people see you at the next level? You know, do you look, sound like somebody who could be at the next level? And that leaves, 60%, he says, of career progress is exposure. Who's seen you in action? Who's seen you deliver? Who's seen you speak? We talked about that earlier. Who's seen you at meetings? What would you be a go-to person for? What are you known for? What's your reputation? All that good stuff. So in terms of, you asked for a specific example. I'll give you when I worked for what's now known as Enterprise Ireland. Do you know those guys?
Yeah.
It was sent out to run their shop with an IDA in Australia. And I didn't know a single person in Australia. I arrived there. I didn't know a sinner. I met a lot of sinners out there, but I didn't know a sinner when I arrived. And I asked, my mum had given me a neighbour's whose son is in Sydney. I rang him and asked him, could he introduce me to the local Irish business network? And he said, there isn't really one here. I said, well, let's set one up. So I used to play rugby and he played rugby. So we called it the Lansdowne Road Club.
Yeah.
30 people showed up for our first event. Then, in a spirit of sort of sporting ecumenism, because it was non-rugby people wanted to be involved, we dropped the road, called it the Lansdowne Club. Now, it's there today. There's 5,000 members, the biggest Irish business network in any city in the world. But back then, it was sort of nothing, and we just were trying to get it going. And I wanted to try and find somebody who could be a great kind of well-known Irish business figure who'd lend his name to this nascent organization that nobody knew. And I wrote a letter. You guys are too young to remember this name, but the name was Tony O'Reilly, head of the H.J. Heinz food company in the US, but he was a Belvedere. He's a Dublin lad, Belvedere boy, and fabulous global international rugby player and all that stuff. But I wrote him a letter, and he was in Pittsburgh, and I didn't expect to even get an answer. But he wrote back and he said, love what you're doing. Very interested in the Irish diaspora around the world, interested in setting up a network of people around the world who'd have an interest in Ireland. And then I couldn't believe the last bit of the letter. He said, I'm coming to Sydney. I'm buying newspapers in Australia. And could we meet for lunch? So, I mean, me, a total nobody, could we meet for lunch? I was going to write back and say, nah, I'm busy. But I said, I'd love to meet you for lunch. So I met him for lunch. and I worked for him for 21 years.
Wow.
So, you know, one introduction, one conversation can change your life, but they don't happen lying in bed, sitting at your desk. They happen when you're out and about and you do stuff. You put your talents on display. You talk to strangers. You reach out to people who don't know you. And you're often be pleasantly surprised by people's response, you know. So for me, that certainly changed my life. And I moved and went to Boston for 15 years and before coming back to live in Ireland.
That's a great story. Kingsley, it's been wonderful speaking to you today. We've talked about, you know, everything to do with networking. You've given us some great examples and so much advice and knowledge. If somebody's listening to this today and they could just take one thing away from it, what would you want that to be?
I suppose it would be what I said at the beginning and then mentioned a few times throughout it, which is that bear in mind that other people are going to play, decisions made by other people are going to very much influence your life. And so if you're aware of that, which then leads on to relationships and connections and all that good stuff. But, you know, you can't go it alone in life. You need to have relationships and connections with people. And those people are going to they're either going to help you soar or they're going to get in your way. But if you ignore them, you know, it's going to be a problem.
Kingsley, if people want to network with yourself and check out your material, where can they find you?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the Networking Institute has a website, and anybody who gets on to me, did I send you guys some material? I mean, I'm happy to give people that material for free, you know, networking tips and monthly metrics and some stuff like that. And I've got some new stuff coming out. So, they just need to get onto me through LinkedIn is for me the preferred option. Get onto me at LinkedIn and I'll send them whatever we've got.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I'm happy to do that. Great. Thanks, guys.